We are here in front of Hampton Court Palace, and we're going to go take a little tour. This is my first time here. I've been wanting to come here for forever, so excited to be here. Ian, when was the last time you were here?
Probably about 50, almost 50 years ago.
Yes, Ian's more than 50 years old, so that's pretty shocking. And then Trent here, we just picked him up from Heathrow Airport. So he's excited just to be awake and be in England. So we're going to go through Hampton Court Palace to use our time wisely until we go back to Heathrow to pick up Weston, our younger son. So let's go see what this place is all about. The palace was the site of many significant historic events, including the signing of the Treaty of Hampton Court in 1526 and the meeting between Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn that led to the formation of the Church of England. The palace showcases a unique blend of Tudor and Baroque architecture. The Tudor section is famous for its medieval design, while the Baroque section, added by Sir Christopher Wren during the reign of William III and Mary II, reflects a more classical style. The palace just opened, and the first thing we're going to see is Henry VIII's apartments. This is the last medieval Great Hall built for an English monarch, and one of the finest displays of 16th century architecture for a Great Hall that still survives. The tapestries are massive, just lining this whole enormous room. These little faces peering at you from the beams or eaves are eavesdroppers, courtiers who are keeping an eye on whatever you're doing. The ceiling originally would have been painted in very bright colors, blue, gold, and the tapestries would have glistened with lots of gold thread. They're just magnificent displays of artwork, and it's cool to see how the light from the stained glass windows reflects through onto them now. This stained glass window at the end is really beautiful. These medieval table manners are really interesting. Undo your belt a little if it will make you more comfortable, because doing this during the meal is bad manners. This is the former garderobe, although it has been replaced by a fireplace. These tapestries portraying Abraham and the birth of Isaac are to signify the parallel between Henry and the birth of Prince Edward. This is the Great Watching Chamber. In 1537, courtiers waited or watched in this room, anxious for news about Queen Jane and the hoped-for birth of a son and heir for the king. More of the 200 tapestries are displayed in this room. You can see the royal court in this tapestry. It's just beautiful. Hampton Court was Henry VIII's favorite castle, and he spent a lot of time here. He was responsible for building the royal apartments, huge kitchens, the tennis court, and the magnificent ceiling in the Great Hall. Anne Boleyn is the most famous of Henry VIII's wives, and she was indeed Henry VIII's great obsession. It did take him 4 years for him to notice her after she joined the court, but then he was set on having her. Everything about Anne Boleyn was erased after her execution, but a couple places you can still see remains of her initials. AH here is one of them in the Great Hall. This family portrait of Henry VIII's crew includes some of the famous cast of characters and a few that were new to me. From left to right, we have Jane. She was the fool that lived in Princess Mary's households to entertain her family. Here is Princess Mary, age 29 when the painting was done. She was the daughter of Catherine of Aragon and later became Queen Mary I. This is Prince Edward at 8 years of age. He was Henry's much-anticipated son, who became King Edward VI at age 9. Here's Henry, sitting in the center of this idyllic family scene. Next, Jane Seymour is shown in the portrait, even though she was long deceased, which is a bit curious. She was included possibly because she was Edward's mother. This is Princess Elizabeth, shown at age 12. She was Anne Boleyn's daughter and went on to become Queen Elizabeth I. Last, we have Will Somers, and listen to this job description. He was Henry VIII's personal companion, entertainer, and fool. Henry VIII and Catherine Parr were married at Hampton Court in July of 1543. Catherine Parr is my favorite of Henry's wives, not only because she survived him, but also because her grave is near where we live in Gloucestershire, so I've been able to visit it many times at Sudeley Castle. The story of what happened with her grave is really interesting to me. The crown is a replica of the crown that Henry VIII wore when he was crowned, as well as each of his 3 children when they became monarch. Of course, Henry VIII was not the only monarch to live here in Hampton Court. Let's learn a bit more about some of the others. Jane Seymour gave birth to the future King Edward VI here at Hampton Court in her apartments overlooking the Clock Court. Edward was baptized in the Royal Chapel shortly before Jane died. He was monarch from age 9 to his death at age 15, but the country was governed by a regency council during that time because of his young age. This is the Queen's presence chamber, basically a waiting room you would wait in, hoping to see the Queen. Queen Anne spent time at Hampton Court during her reign and commissioned the leading artists and craftsmen of her day to make improvements. Much of Hampton Court was in fact built just before she became queen in 1702. She completed the construction of the Baroque Palace at Hampton Court during her reign. Queen Anne died with no children despite having gone through 17 pregnancies, the poor woman. The next monarch needed to be a Protestant, so they went to Germany to find Protestant monarch in Germany. Georg of Hanover became King George of England. Here in the Georgian guard chamber, I just have to say that the fireplace has these fantastic sculptures. Here is a replica of what the guards would have worn. Yeomen of the Guard. This is the public dining room, meaning this is where King George would come to eat, and the crowds would be allowed to come watch the monarch eat. So they've built a replica here of the rail that would be around the table so that you could come and watch the king eat, but not, heaven forbid, touch him or his food. These beautiful white costume replicas everywhere are made out of paper. This is the privy chamber where, when the king was abroad, visitors, dignitaries, ambassadors, and whatnot would come here to meet with the prince and princess, who would wait in here under this canopy to receive their gifts and hear their pleas. This is the drawing room, which is basically a room used for social things, and the royal board game room. Probably a lot of money was lost in this room. Here is the Queen's bedchamber. There's 4 posters, but no canopy on top. But the ceiling is magnificent. This is why there's no top to the bed in the bedchamber. The canopy is in here being restored. The story about the bedroom was that it was really just a bedroom for show. It was a place where they would go to have conversations and things, and there was a bed in there so people would think it was the bedroom, but it wasn't where the monarch actually slept. This is the Queen's gallery, and this long room was sometimes used for social events, but it is private quarters that was also used for exercising on the days when the weather outside was too bad to promenade outdoors. Frederick, Prince of Wales, Queen Caroline, George II. This is where the chocolate was made for King George I and II. If only there was some chocolate here today. Here in the King's Staircase, it's amazing because there's a mural on the wall and on the ceiling, but there's not really a dividing point between the wall and the ceiling. It just curves around into one massive mural. I am filming this video at the beginning of May 2023 and thought it was cool to see this announcement for an upcoming concert that the Palace Choir was performing in honor of King Charles's coronation. Trent and I enjoyed lunch in the Privy Kitchen Cafe, which was formerly the Privy Kitchen for Elizabeth I. We enjoyed some delicious pies for our main course and may or may not have had a little slice of cake for dessert. This looks like the royal wine cellar. Back out in the main courtyard, I was amused to see that there were actors in character as actors in Tudor times. They were there in the palace that day to perform for the king that night. Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream. They were nice enough to take selfies with me, although they had to pretend they didn't know what a cell phone or a selfie was. Another salient feature of the castle is this astronomical clock on the gatehouse. It was installed in 1540 and not only tells the time, but also shows the phases of the moon, the position of the sun, and the tides of the River Thames. Hampton Court Palace really is a palace full of courts. This is the Master Carpenter's Court, and we're headed into Henry VIII's kitchens. These look like the pies we ate for lunch. Then they didn't have any vegetarian pies like the one I had for lunch, though, with sweet potato and kale in it. Here were their selections. Here in the boiling house, the fire was down here, and then the meat was boiled all morning and afternoon here. And now walking through Fish Court, we come to this room where the fish would be stored. Look at the varieties. I feel like I'm at a chippy, but not wanting to try eel. Here in the main kitchen, we get to see more replica ingredients, many of which have very unusual spellings by today's standards. This is the most massive kitchen room I've ever seen. And what's really great is it has a real fire going in this fireplace. It's nice and warm on this chilly May day. So many fireplaces. I guess it takes a lot to cook for a king and all his court. And this is my favorite bit, the bread oven. And here's a weight rack so Trent can do some squats. This is probably where the servants ate. Now let's go check out the Tennis Pavilion. We think of Henry VIII as a portly old gluttonous king, but as a young man, Henry was athletic, graceful, and loved all sports, especially tennis. But Henry was a terrible gambler and lost a huge amount of money gambling on the outcomes of his own and other players' matches. Apparently, Prince Albert was not as keen on tennis. You can still see the insignia of Queen Victoria here on the wall of the tennis courts. She wrote in her journal in 1848 that Albert went to Hampton Court to play at tennis. She even had a brass plaque affixed next to the locker assigned for his exclusive use. Unfortunately, he didn't warm to the idea of becoming an avid tennis player and never returned, though the brass plaque is still there today. The palace is surrounded by extensive gardens, which are delightful to wander through. I love these jousting knights in the garden. I don't believe in beheading people, but I do think these tulips need to be beheaded. I'm fascinated by heraldic gardens and enjoyed walking through this one, looking at the interesting creatures from crests and coats of arms shown off in this colorful garden as figures atop these posts. I believe this was the private garden that Henry VIII had designed for him. Each monarch had a private garden or privy garden that was created for their exclusive use. This is my favorite garden because we always want to see wisteria, but usually miss the season, and there's beautiful wisteria here. And not only is it pretty to look at, but it smells fantastic. Most of the flowers are not in bloom, but these irises are pretty. This is a really awesome wooden sculpture of a gardener. It looks like it's a tree.
He's all bark and no bite.
Here from the back of the Privy Garden, you have the royal view of the River Thames, which was a feature the monarchs really enjoyed, their own personal view of the Thames. I hope you enjoyed coming along on our visit to Hampton Court Palace. Please check out these other videos of Windsor Castle and Blenheim Palace. Thanks so much for watching this video, and do something good in the world today.